We are now on to the statements that we have to fill out for our bankruptcy forms. And the first statement is a statement of financial affairs. So let's look at how Ashley filled it out and pull up a brand new clean form that we can take a look at. Okay, here is official form 107. It's a statement of financial affairs for individuals filing bankruptcy. And generally, this just asks, what are your general details about your finances? What kind of stuff do you owe, and what kind of debts do you have? What kind of things are pending right now? If you have any lawsuits pending against you, it'll ask about that. And so we're going to show you how Ashley filled it out, so it might give you a bit of guidance about your own schedules. So we'll fill in Ashley's full name like she did, where she filed. And move on to part 1. Give details about your marital status and where you lived before. What is your current marital status? In Ashley's situation, she was not married, and that's the box that she selected. During the past 3 years, have you lived anywhere other than where you live now? In Ashley's case, the answer was no. Of course, if the answer for you is yes, you would fill in where you lived in the last 3 years. And if you have more than 2 places, you may want to include an attachment that includes where else you've lived. Within the last 3 years, did you ever live with a spouse or legal equivalent in a community property state or territory? And that includes the following states. In Ashley's case, she selected no. That did not apply to her. And so let's move on to part 2. Explain the sources of your income. Did you have any income from employment or from operating a business during this year or the 2 previous calendar years? And it basically just asks for those details, just like we saw in Schedule I. So in Ashley's case, she selected yes and filled out some of her details. From January 1 of the current year, which for her was 2019, she filed in December 2019. So from January 1 of 2019 until the date you filed bankruptcy, it asks to list your sources of income. And so for Ashley, her first source of income and her primary source of income was wages, commissions, bonuses, and tips. And I think for her, it was really just wages. So gross income for Ashley, up to that point in the year, she had made $33,500. For the last calendar year, January 1 to December 31, 2018, Ashley had listed that she made $35,000 in wages. And for January 1 through 2017, Ashley listed that she made $28,000. So just like she did, what you do here is you would hopefully pull your payment records or your pay stubs from these prior calendar years, or your tax returns would be another good way to do this, and list out the amounts that you made in gross income, in other words, before deductions and exclusions applied, and you list them here just like Ashley did. Okay, part 5, did you receive any other income during this year or the 2 previous calendar years? And you can go ahead and read the list here of what that might include. So alimony, child support are good examples. Social Security, unemployment, and other amounts, you would include those here if they apply to you. In Ashley's case, she selected no, so she did not have to continue filling in the details. Moving on to part 3. Are either debtor 1 or debtor 2's debts primarily consumer debts? In Ashley's case, the answer that she selected was yes. That's because her debts were primarily consumer debts. And so it asked, during the 90 days before you filed for bankruptcy, did you pay any creditor a total of $600 or more? This is important for a couple reasons that we won't get in too much depth here, but basically the court's trying to make sure they know, did any of your creditors get preferential treatment in that they got a payment of $600 or more that your other creditors did not get. So in Ashley's example, she selected yes. For her, that was her car note. And so she listed her creditor's name, which was Western Funding Inc., and her address for that creditor, which was P.O. Box 94858, Las Vegas, Nevada 89193. And it asked for the dates of payment within the 90 days before she filed for bankruptcy. For her, she made a payment on 10/1/2019. She made a payment on 11/1/2019. And she made a payment on 12/1/2019. And the total amount she paid was $11.16. The amount she still owed, just like you recall she listed in Schedule D for this creditor, was $11,128. And this payment was for a car, and that's what she selected. So if you have any other payments that you made in an amount greater than $600 for anything besides domestic support obligations, payments to an attorney for your bankruptcy case, you would list them here. In Ashley's case, she just had this, and that's all she listed. So we can move on to question 7. Within 1 year before you filed for bankruptcy, did you make a payment on a debt you owed to anyone who was an insider? And so the insider is a defined term under the bankruptcy code, and they define it here as well. So you might want to read that definition and make sure that this doesn't apply to you. In Ashley's case, it did not, and she selected no. If you did have any payments to an insider, you'd want to list them here. Question 8, within 1 year before you filed for bankruptcy, did you make any payments or transfer any property on account of a debt that benefited an insider? This is a bit of a mouthful, but basically, did you, within 1 year before, if you made a payment to an insider here, you probably are going to select yes here, but in Ashley's case, the answer was no. Did you make any payments or transfer any property? Basically, to pay off a loan that an insider made to you. That's essentially what this is asking. Question 9. Within 1 year before you filed bankruptcy, were you a party in any lawsuit, court action, or administrative proceeding? In Ashley's case, she actually was. And so she selected yes here. And it asked that you go ahead and fill in some of the details about the case. So in Ashley's case, and I'll again, for privacy considerations, list a fake details about her case, but she did have 2 pending lawsuits within 1 year before the bankruptcy was filed. So here are the details. Apartments at Dalton versus Ashley Adams. And then she also included the case number. And that's not a real case number, so just for her own privacy. The nature of the case for Ashley, she put civil. This was presumably a case that her landlord had against, a landlord of hers had against her, or maybe it was a lease that she co-signed or guaranteed. She doesn't provide the details of that, so I won't guess at them. But for court and agency, she selected Jefferson, Birmingham District Court. And the status of the case, as of the date she filed bankruptcy, the case had been concluded. The next case she had was Credit Acceptance v. Ashley Adams. This, I believe, was a collection action against her for other debt that she owed. And so $2,005, That's a fake case number as well. She selected civil as the nature of the case, and the same court where it was happening, and she selected concluded. And so that's that. Now, I mean, something that makes this process a bit more complicated for her is that she did have lawsuits pending and that they did conclude. I believe both of these lawsuits ended in the creditors getting judgments against her. And so that potentially makes it a bit more complicated because they recorded those judgments and she had to do a few extra steps in her bankruptcy to get those judgments essentially wiped from her records. So I'll go maybe a bit more into detail on this on a later video, but for now, just keep in mind that if you were a party to a lawsuit within a year before you filed bankruptcy, you'd want to list them here. Question 10. Within 1 year before you filed for bankruptcy, was any of your property repossessed, foreclosed, garnished, attached, seized, or levied? Essentially, did any of your creditors take any of your property to pay off money that you owed to them? In her case, the answer was no, so she selected no. If you did have property taken from you by your creditors, you'd want to list that here. Question 11, within 90 days before you filed for bankruptcy, did any creditor set off any amounts from your accounts or refuse to make a payment because you owed a debt? This is a bit complicated of a question, but essentially what this is asking is, did any of your creditors who also owed money back to you take money to offset those two things? So, for example, if you got your mortgage from your banking institution and you actually had money in your checking account at that bank, and the bank actually took some of your money in your checking account to try to pay down some of the money for your mortgage, that would actually be a set-off. And so if that happened to you, you'd want to list that here. In Ashley's case, the answer was no. Within 1 year before you filed for bankruptcy, was any of your property in the possession of an assignee for the benefit of creditors, a receiver, a custodian, or other official? That's probably a bit outside the scope of this video, but for Ashley, the answer was no. Part 5 lists certain gifts and contributions. Within 2 years before you filed for bankruptcy, did you give any gifts with a total value of more than $600 per person? In Ashley's case, the answer that she selected was no, and so she left this blank. If you did make any gifts and $600 or more, you'd want to fill it out here. 14, within 2 years before you filed for bankruptcy, did you give any gifts or contributions worth a value of more than $600 to any charity? You'd want to list that here. In Ashley's case, she selected no. And moved on to part 6. List certain losses. Within 1 year before you filed for bankruptcy, did you lose anything because of theft, fire, gambling, anything like that? In Ashley's case, she selected no. If anything like that happened to you, you'd want to fill it in here. Part 7, list certain payments or transfers. Within 1 year before you filed for bankruptcy, did you or anyone else pay property to anyone you consulted about seeking bankruptcy or preparing a bankruptcy petition? So this would be if you had any attorneys, if you have what's called a bankruptcy petition preparer, which will charge money to help prepare a bankruptcy for you, or a credit counseling agency. And in Ashley's case, she actually did, and that was pretty much all for her attorney. And so I'm going to go ahead and make a fake name for her attorney, which we'll call David Stevens. He lived in Huntsville. And we'll provide a fake address for this person, just for privacy. Email david@stevenslaw.com. Okay, and the first was the first payment she made was for attorney's fees. She made this payment pretty soon before she filed her bankruptcy in late November of 2019. And that was for that was for $260. She actually paid him, I believe, $1,200 in total. And so this was basically the first installment payment that she made to this attorney. They also included a credit report, and that was also made on 11/28/2019 for $40. And so those were the payments she listed for people that helped prepare her for bankruptcy. Question 17, within 1 year before you filed for bankruptcy, did you or anyone else acting on your behalf transfer money to anyone who promised to help you deal with your creditors or make payments to your creditors? In Ashley's case, she selected no. If that applied to you, you'd want to fill it in here. Question 18, within 2 years before you filed for bankruptcy, did you sell, trade, or otherwise transfer any property to anyone other than the ordinary course of business? In Ashley's case, she selected no here as well. Question 19, within 10 years before you filed for bankruptcy, did you transfer any property to a self-settled trust or similar device of which you are a beneficiary? This is essentially, asset hiding, or not asset hiding, but asset protection to try to keep property outside the reach of your creditors. In Ashley's case, this did not apply to her, so she selected no. Part 8, list certain financial accounts, instruments, safe deposit boxes. For most of these questions, she selected no, and so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on these. Just keep in mind that if these apply to you, you do want to fill these in. For Ashley, nothing in Part 8 actually applies to her. You'll recall that all she had was a checking account with $3 in it, so she's not going to have any more complex financial instruments. So she here selected no for question 20, no for question 21, and no for question 22. Part 9, identify property held or controlled for someone else. This is asking basically, do you have property that is actually owned by someone else that you're holding for them? And in Ashley's case, she selected no. You'd fill in the details here if you did. For part 10, this is asking about environmental information, environmental law information. And so question 24 is, has any government unit notified you may be potentially liable for a violation of environmental law? The answer for Ashley was no. Obviously, as we talked about when we filled out the petition, if you do have issues with regards to environmental law, you probably are going to want to consult with an attorney. It's going to make your case a lot more complicated. Question 25, have you notified any governmental unit of a release of hazardous material? For Ashley, the answer was no. Likewise, in question 26, have you been a party to a judicial or administrative proceeding involving environmental law? For Ashley, the answer was no. Again, all these things are going to make your case a lot more complicated and probably are going to justify the need for an attorney. Part 11, within 4 years before you filed for bankruptcy, did you own any business? In Ashley's case, the answer for her was no. Obviously, if you do own a business, you're going to want to list them here and provide details about that business. Question 28, within 2 years before you filed for bankruptcy, did you give a financial statement to anyone about your business? Ashley did not have any businesses within 2 years before the bankruptcy, so the answer for her was no. Okay, and so we've now completed the statement of financial affairs, and we can go ahead and sign using our electronic signature. This is what Ashley did to sign her petition, and she dated it, the date of her petition, which was 12/17/2019. It also asked, did you attach additional pages to your statement of financial affairs? And if you've answered any of the above questions with yes and wanted to provide more details, or felt like it was reasonable to provide more details, then you might very well need to attach an additional page or two. And so for Ashley, though, her case is simple. She selected no. Did you pay or agree to pay anyone who is not an attorney to help you fill out bankruptcy forms? In Ashley's example, she selected no. She did pay an attorney to help prepare her for bankruptcy, and I guess part of those payments was probably to help prepare these forms, but she didn't pay anyone who is not an attorney to help you fill out forms. Obviously, if you do, then you'd select yes. The great thing about Better and using our website is that we don't require any payment. It's all free. So that is the Statement of Financial Affairs. It's a long form, I know, but it's good to have it done. And so we'll go ahead and save it. I'll save it to the desktop, and I'll save it as is. And now that I've done that, I can, again, go ahead and upload it. Statement of Financial Affairs, and save. So it's been saved, and I can click completed to tell the website that this form is ready to be finalized when I'm done with my other forms. And that is it. We are done with the Statement of Financial Affairs. Thank you for your patience in dealing with this form. This is one of the longer ones. So we are moving through this process. We have a couple more statements to go, and then we'll be done with the forms. Thank you.